I should start?
Go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name's Ed Achorn. I'm a newspaper journalist and a historian. I have an ancient iPhone 4S, which is why you were looking at a still picture this morning instead of a video. It's a great honor to be here among such an impressive array of topics and speakers. And I thank you, Kelly, and I thank you, Gary, for putting this on. This is quite an event. Next picture. My new book is about Abraham Lincoln, second most written about figure in history after Jesus Christ. But I think I found a new angle on him, and the book is written much in the style of the baseball books. And I've had some great reviews so far, including one last week in the Wall Street Journal, and I hope you'll check that out. Next slide. 59 and 84. I addressed the conference on Long Island several years ago about this book, about old Hoss Radbourne, who was so cantankerous that he was evidently the first man ever photographed giving the middle finger. And you might notice what he's doing on the cover there. Next picture. Beer and Whiskey. I'm here to talk about my second book, The Summer of Beer and Whiskey. One of the reasons I love baseball is that it opens an extraordinary window on American culture. Like any period you look at it, tells you a lot about America. And I love early baseball, especially the kind you love to play, because it is incredibly colorful and filled with stories that have never been told or only rarely. The Summer of Beer and Whiskey looks at a wonderfully entertaining major league in the 1880s, the American Association, which its detractors dubbed the Beer and Whiskey League because saloon owners, beer brewers, and distillers were the prominent owners. But it was a league that helped rescue baseball and make it truly America's game. Next picture, Chris Vaughn. The league's most incredible figure was the man who founded the St. Louis Cardinals franchise. Chris Vaughn, who was seen here later in the 1880s when he put on some weight, was an immigrant from Germany who ran a grocery and saloon, catering mostly to immigrants in his neighborhood. He knew next to nothing about baseball, but was fascinated in the activities at the ballpark located just down the street from his saloon. A series of native-born Americans had tried to make a go of baseball, but had utterly failed. The game had been destroyed by gambling, corruption, and people didn't like the nasty experience at the ballpark. And that was true all over the country, and professional baseball was nearly dead. Vaughn, this immigrant grocer, decided he could do what the native-born Americans couldn't. He took his life savings and put it all into baseball. His formula was to hire honest players, to sell beer at his park, to have Sunday games, and to charge a cheap admission price. He also threw in some showmanship, doing some things like introducing fireworks to the ballpark. He helped create a new league where all this was possible, and he ended up making a fortune. Next picture, the 1883 Browns. This is his team in 1883, posing in front of the new scoreboard he installed. And he's standing there in the middle, the focus of attention as usual. I thought I'd read a little bit from the book about him. Everyone who knew Chris Vaughn, it seems, had a story about him, about his colossal pomposity, his wonderful generosity, his red-faced rages that inevitably recoiled catastrophically on himself, his thick German accent and wobbly use of the English language, and his insatiable appetite for beer, beautiful young women, song, and life. As a baseball owner, he was George Steinbrenner, Charlie Finley, and Bill Veeck rolled into one. Haughty, temperamental, driven to win, wildly experimental, and madly in love with a dazzling show. He had a splash of Yogi Berra in him, too, which surfaced in his expression of Zen-like axioms. Many stories suggest Vaughn knowledge of the game was less than encyclopedic. We hear in one 1885 article that he bragged to his off-and-on press secretary, Dave Reed, when the two were meeting at the ballpark. Dave, this was the biggest diamond in the country. No, Chris, replied Dave. All diamonds are the same size. Well, replied Chris, it was the biggest infield anyhow. Since Wanderer traveled with his team frequently and made complicated deals to obtain very good ball players, such colossal ignorance seems beyond belief. Yet many contemporary accounts, including from people who admired him, attest that he never quite seemed to grasp the intricacies of baseball. Often after his team lost the game, his longtime manager Charlie Comiskey recalled, Chris would dash into the club's dressing room, single out a certain player and shout, "Why did you drop that ball, eh?" He took every muff as a personal affront and seemed to think that poor players could explain in well-chosen words why they happened to muff. On other occasions, he tried to inspire players with clubhouse addresses characterized by his memorable flair for language. One reporter claimed he once delivered this warning about blushing or excessive drinking. "See here now, I don't want some foolishness from you fellows. If you want to stop this slushing and play ball, if you win the championship, I give you all a suit of clothes and a benefit game extra. And if you don't, you will have to eat snowballs all winter." His use of English made even his friends laugh. Longtime Baltimore Orioles manager Billy Barney recalled introducing a couple of traveling reporters to the St. Louis owner one day back when it was rare for sports writers to accompany teams on road trips. "Boys, I'm awful glad to see you and welcome you to St. Louis," Wanderer declared. "Over there is my park. It is at your disposal." Administered once for letting some good players go, Wanderer wrung his hands and moaned, "Why, oh why, didn't I take mine own advice?" He was also an insatiable womanizer, a failing that made him a figure of ridicule in the papers and virtually ruined his life. On a roasting hot Sunday night in St. Louis in August 1885, while his wife Emma was sitting on the steps in front of their house at 3613 St. Louis Avenue, he came careening around the corner, crashing his carriage. Out spilled a pretty young Vaughn named Miss Kitty Dewey, who escaped serious injury but not a tongue lashing from Mrs. Wanderer. When Miss Dewey had the nerve to show up at Wanderer's Sportsman's Park a month later, Emma crept up on her, pulled a soda bottle from the folds of her dress, and brought it crashing down on the young woman's head.
You just take the link and
that's a little of Chris Wanderer. Next picture. It's a cartoon of Arlie Lapham. This is Wanderer's loudmouth third baseman, Arlie Lapham,
just ate breakfast.
who was known as the freshest man on earth. He was also very fast. Wanderer told people, "That boy Lapham can run like a cantaloupe."
I don't have any Diet Coke.
Next picture. This is William Hulbert, the very stern president of the established National League, which included the team in my city of Providence.
I can do it. I just don't
The
want any
league banned
noises from
Sunday games
Facebook
and
to
beer
go out
sales
over
and
this.
charged
That's
the
why I
steep
don't want to
admission
do it.
price of 50 cents,
Well,
all designed
I
to
don't know what
ruin the
happens
game's
on
reputation and keep the riffraff out.
family. They could
He was
have
horrified at the freewheeling beer and
videos
whiskey
going and
league.
stuff while I'm trying
But because
to
of the
post.
association's policies of beer, Sunday ball, and cheap admissions,
Okay.
attendance
All right.
exploded.
I got to pay attention to
Working
him.
people who toiled 6 days a week could attend games on Sundays and could afford 25 cents.
No.
Baseball became wildly
hurry up and do
popular
it.
and more truly America's game. The next picture of Brown's Sportsman's Park. Early ballparks were made out of wood rather than today's concrete and steel, and they wouldn't exactly pass today's OSHA regulations. I'll read a little bit about that from the book. Meanwhile, more than the club threatened to come apart. After a huge Sunday turnout of 12,200 on May 27th, the upper deck of Sportsman's Park swayed perceptibly and shook as if it would tumble to pieces as customers made for the narrow staircase that served as the deck's only exit. Fortunately, no one panicked, but after the crowd got down, good citizens implored reporters to speak out about the danger before the structure collapsed and killed dozens of people. Such an accident would be a death blow to baseball in St. Louis, the Missouri Republican warned. It's dollars to donuts that the architect never suspected it would be used for such a purpose, the Globe Democrat added. Wanderer got the hint. The owner called in German-born Edmund Jugendfeld, a prestigious St. Louis specialist in brewery architecture who had designed buildings at the Budweiser plant, and the facility owned by club director Milker. Jugenfeld strengthened and lengthened the roof while adding open seats on top of it. Wanderé was eager to cram all the paying customers he could inside his Sportsman's Park, which now had a hefty seating capacity of 11,000. Next one, the broken hands. As most people listening to this know, one of the amazing things about baseball in this era is that it was played barehanded, and players had the broken and shattered hands to prove it. Catchers wore some protection on their palms, but their fingers were exposed to foul tips. This is what the hands of one early catcher, Doug Allison, ended up looking like. Next picture is Moses Fleetwood Walker. This is one of the American Association's catchers, a man named Moses Fleetwood Walker. He was the first recognized African American to play Major League Baseball, not Jackie Robinson, though he had much in common with Jackie. He was talented, college-educated, and had extraordinary powers of self-control to deal with the abuse hurled his way. I'll read a little bit about his experience playing for Toledo in 1884, and this was in the major leagues at the time. During Walker's brief tenure at this level of competition, his considerable strength of character was severely tested. His 1884 battery mate, hard-throwing Tony Mullane, deliberately tormented Fleet that season. Walker was, quote, the best catcher I ever worked with, Mullane admitted years later, but I disliked the Negro. And whenever I had to pitch to him, I used to pitch anything I wanted without looking at his signals. One day, Walker signaled for a curve, and Mullane dangerously crossed him up by firing a fastball. Catcher walked up to the pitcher's box. Mr. Mullane, Walker said, I'll catch you without signals, but I won't catch you if you're going to cross me when I give you a signal. And for the rest of that season, he caught everything Mullane pitched without knowing what was coming. Walker endured other slights from his teammates as well. In that season's team portrait, Fleet Walker was nowhere to be seen. Only white players appeared, as if Walker never existed. Next picture, Opie Taylor, the reporter. One of the fun things about early baseball is how colorful the sports writing was. This is Opie Taylor, a Cincinnati sports writer who could be pretty good, but he was often attacked by other sports writers. I'll read one example I love. The Louisville commercial correspondent even took out his frustrations on Cincinnati sports writer Opie Taylor, claiming that Taylor, whom he dubbed the Ghoul because of his pale, slender appearance, had badly skewed his coverage. Quote, physically he is a ghost, with less blood in him than the meek and lowly turnip, which has been his principal diet for the last 62 years. Mentally, he is one of the 9 goose eggs that the Cincinnatis earned in the first game at Louisville last week. As a whole, he is that part of a horse's anatomy which is always nearest to the dashboard. A little bit of sports writing in that day. Next picture, the Yale team. Okay, one last bit. In the center of this picture is a dapper young man who was the son of America's first woman dentist. He was a superb whistler, a member of the Yale Glee Club, and a star pitcher for the Yale team. He also had the funniest pitching motion in baseball history. The badly injured Philadelphia Athletics signed him at the end of the season in an act of desperation. And I'll read a bit about what happened in his first game. With a weakened Bobby Matthews, the Athletics did not look so indomitable anymore. No one could seriously think that a college kid could fill the breach, even one as heavily hyped as this Yale boy. Wanderé sat back to see what the fuss was all about. Dan Jones strode to the pitcher's box in front of the biggest crowd that had ever watched him play. The Fanatics seemed more subdued than they had been on Monday, perhaps sensing the implications of this game. The strange young man with a cocky demeanor, dark mustache, and sparkling eyes held the fate of the 1883 season in his hands that day. It was perfect silence when he took his position, the Philadelphia Times reported. Bill Gleason, the brawny volunteer fireman, decidedly no college man, took his place in the batter's box and glared at the rookie. Jones nervously pitched 3 balls wide of the plate. He got the ball back and held it in his hands for a while, staring in at his catcher. Jones knew what he had to do. Next picture of his motion. Quote, then he jumped 2 feet in the air, and while Gleason gazed at him in astonishment, the ball traveled squarely over the center of the plate and 1 strike was called. The Times said, Jumping Jack jumped again, and Gleason aimed at a ball 2 feet from the end of his bat. He jumped again on the next ball, and Gleason was called on strikes. Vaughn and the Philadelphia crowd could barely believe it. It was ridiculous, ludicrous. Spectators looked at each other, laughed, and pointed in amazement as Jones made his celebrated leap 3 or 4 times per inning, usually when there were 2 strikes on the batter. No one else could get it. It is taught exclusively at Yale, the Philadelphia Press informed its readers. His antics in the pitcher's box by jumping up and cracking his heels on every other ball pitched was very amusing to the crowd, unquote. It was less so to the Browns hitters, who had trouble adapting. You don't know whether Jones or the ball is coming for you, one player explained his frustration. Through 5 innings, Jumping Jack led 6-1. Then he poured it on, retiring the last 12 men in succession. In the 8th inning, with the Athletics leading 11-1, the deliriously happy crowd began taunting the Browns by whistling the Dead March in unison. When Jones struck up the last batter to end the game, recapturing first place for the Athletics, spectators flung their derby hats in the air and jumped onto the field. They quickly surrounded the pitcher, heaved him up, and bore him on their shoulders to the dressing room. The Yale boy was an instant Philadelphia sports hero, quote, the most popular man who ever played ball on the Athletic Browns, the Philadelphia Press declared the next day. This cartoon of Jumping Jack in action was actually drawn by another ball player, Charlie Riley of the Cincinnati Reds. Next picture. The cigar box. The American Association was mildly popular for a time. Here's the cigar box celebrating the exploits of Bondurant and his St. Louis team. For a number of reasons, the league eventually merged with the National League in 1892, sort of like the AFL-NFL merger in football. 4 American Association franchises are still going strong today. The St. Louis Cardinals, the Cincinnati Reds, the Pittsburgh Pirates, and the Los Angeles Dodgers, formerly of Brooklyn. Next picture. Well, that's a very brief look at the wonderful season I focus on in this wonderful league, and I'd be happy to answer some questions.
Unmuted.
Ed, at this point, it looks like we do not have any questions. So if you want to take the rest of the time to chat a little bit about something else, you're welcome to do so while we wait for our next presenter, Tom Derry.
Okay. Well, I don't have any questions, evidently, so I will just...
Muted.
On one of the... I know you guys play vintage ball, and you try to follow the actual rules. One of the interesting differences in the American Association from the National League was something, the foul bound rule, which you guys are, I'm sure, are familiar with. That's the National League had banished it by 1883 on a foul ball. If it bounced once and you caught it, it was no longer an out. But the American Association kept that going until 1886. So that made for some very exciting dashes for foul balls, people trying to catch it after it had bounced only once. So those are the major differences, and I hope you enjoyed this journey into 1883 baseball. And I hope if you have any interest in 19th century history, you'll pick up my new book on Abraham Lincoln, called Every Drop of Blood. It's getting really sensational reviews. I'm very, very grateful for that. And I'm very grateful for the Vintage Baseball Association. I think you guys do a fantastic job keeping the early game alive, and I wish you all the best, and I hope when this virus is over, we can get together next year at the next convention.